Today we're going to cover another most interesting topic and which can cost you a lot of money. One calendar date actually that might cost you a lot of money in surprise taxes. So, what is that date? And Vakar, what is departure date?
First of all, thank you, Narendra Paji. Thank you for having me. This is indeed a very important question, and a lot of time our clients get confused. What is my departure date? And most of the time they think that the day they left Canada is their departure date, but in some cases they are right, but in most of the cases they are not. So the departure date can be determined from three things. One is when you left Canada. The other thing is when your family left Canada. The third one is when you have actually sever all the ties from Canada. So that could be the departure date. Now, some people think that when they have left Canada, so suppose if a person has found a job in USA and he left in Jan, so he might think that he that is the departure date for him, but that is not the case until if he has a family back in Canada. So until the family leaves Canada, so this is how basically the departure date is determined, which we'll talk in our
Yeah.
discussion.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting, but why this date is so important for Canadians?
So why the date is very important just because that the departure date determine your you are seizing your residency from Canada. The other is that determines your fair market value of your assets, which you are going to pay tax on those assets. So this is why it is very important that you have an accurate departure date. So as I said that the departure date is determined from three things. One is when you left Canada. The other thing is if you have a family. So if they left after you left Canada, so maybe that would be the departure date. In most cases, yes. If your wife and kids are here and they left after you left, so suppose you left in January and they left in July, so the July would be your departure date in your dependent case. The other thing is when you become a resident of a new country. So when you become a resident of new country, that would be basically the day you become a non-resident of Canada would be determined. So why it is important, as you said, that because the fair market value of all of your investment will be determined based on your departure date. So whatever fair market value as of your departure date will be considered a deemed sale of your non-registered assets, and then you will pay tax on those assets based on your departure date. So that this is why it is important to know your departure date more accurately.
Yes, and we see it on a daily basis with our clients, Vakar. So why don't you show a light with a clear example that we just experienced with one of our clients very recently? I would love you to just share with our clients too.
So as I said, that one of our client actually left for, he found a job in Middle East and he left for basically UAE in last year. But his family, his house was in Canada. So the family was living in their primary residence, and he has one kid and a wife who are living here. And he actually left around last year in 2025 Feb, and he thought that that is a date when he became a non-resident, and he filed by himself actually a departure tax return, just stating that he is a non-resident, based on the day he left Canada. And then when he filed his family's departure tax return based on their date, when they left Canada, so CRA sent him a letter of, to just provide a clarification that if their family or the dependent were in Canada, so how he become a non-resident of Canada. Because why it is important, the day you left Canada is not you become a non-resident. So when your family leaves Canada is the day you become a non-resident. So whatever income you have started earning when you left Canada will be subject to tax here in Canada until your dependents leave Canada. So it is very very important, to so that's why actually CRA sent a letter, because they want to have their share, just because your family were here, they were using all the facilities the government of Canada provides. So that's why it is very very important to just know about your
Yeah.
departure date and be clear on that. Whatever income you will start earning, regardless you have left, but if your family is here, you are supposed to pay tax on all that worldwide income until your family remains in Canada.
Yeah, I still remember the day that he called us, and then I picked the call, and the bill was over $60,000 because he was blessed. He was making a lot of money in Middle East, and he thought, it was all
Yeah,
tax-free, but the entire year worth of his earning got taxed in Canada.
yeah,
So
exactly. Yeah.
yeah, it's interesting, like how our clients get caught up and they make it wrong, and one little mistake cost them thousands of dollars. So, Wakar, continuing that, how can they protect themselves? What sort of thing that they should be taking care of before they even think of leaving Canada?
Very, very important question, basically. So, first of all, you should not assume that this is the date when you left Canada is your departure date. if you have a family or dependent here in Canada, and specifically if you have any dependent or ties, major ties like primary ties here in Canada. So do not assume and then plan ahead. Like rather you have left Canada and then you started planning sometime, you are not sure. So we can understand, but if you are sure that you are leaving maybe, a year ahead, year down the road, so then it is always advisable to, plan ahead of your departure date. And then do not assume until your family leaves Canada and you have primary ties, because that's where the major surprises comes, because from the CRA side, because once you assume that okay, this is my departure date, and you leave and then you file your departure tax, with different dates, obviously, and then CRA will come back and ask you to pay the tax on worldwide income based on your ties here in Canada. So these are the most important things to pay attention when you will leave Canada, and that way you can avoid hefty bill, tax bill, in fact, and a letter from CRA, and especially when you are outside of Canada and you receive such a letter, so it is very difficult to deal with, and you become you go under stress, obviously, that, and calling them from and there is a time difference, and calling
It's
them
hard
long
to
distance. Yeah.
it's hard to connect to CRA when you're locally
Exactly.
here. You can imagine when you're actually outside of Canada. So
Even it
I
is
understand.
really hard even within Canada to connect with CRA. I mean,
Yes,
sometimes
yes,
an
yes.
hour wait time and more than an hour wait time and disconnects, and
So
you are
what
still.
I understood, Vakar, is do not get too excited when you actually, depart or you actually board on plane that, hey, I'm done with Canada or everything is gonna be tax free, especially when you're actually, going to a tax haven like Dubai and other countries where there's no tax. So people do get excited, but the residency and it's more to it. Is not when you actually left Canada, but if your spouse, your dependent, if your ties are still with Canada, you are still hooked by CRA and you gotta pay tax in Canada. So it's very important. So I learned a lot today. Thank you so much, Wakar. Any final comments on these dates so that our clients do not get surprised and get a hefty bills and they could save thousands of dollars?
Just I would say rather, because that is a most critical tax return when you leave Canada. So always consult with a professional, and do not try to file for yourself, because in some time, as I said, that departure tax in our earlier video comes with some penalty forms like T1161 and T1135. Not all the clients have such situation, but in some cases you are not aware, and if you do not file, then there are penalties, and heavy penalties, and then interest on top of those penalties. So always consult a professional, because that is, I would say, a last tax return from your side with CRA. So rather, just assuming a different dates and then you have ties and filing for yourself. So it is always advisable to consult with a professional and then file, and do not assume, and plan ahead before leaving Canada.
I have a lot more to ask you, but let's wrap up our episode today on departure date. Thank you so much. Our community deserves better.
Thank you so much.